Rightio, puppets, and welcome, mates. Welcome to your last day of reading for the week. Today we are on Chapter 4, Shots and Speeches. Do not forget, when you are done, to go to Google Classroom and fill out the assignment that goes with the shots and speeches. Today we are learning about what big decision the colonists make as a result of the shots fired in Massachusetts and speeches delivered in Pennsylvania. Yesterday, we read about the shot heard around the world, Paul Revere, Sam Adams, and John Hancock. Today, we will continue where we left off and see what happens due to the shots fired and speeches delivered. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. What a difference a day makes. By the time the sun came up on April 20th, 1775, the British Army had retreated from Concord back to Boston. They had suffered more than 200 casualties and were now surrounded by militia. Things went from bad to worse when the militia set up cannons on two hills overlooking Boston Harbor. One of the hills was called Breed's Hill, the other was Bunker Hill. The British generals were worried. If the militia had cannons up on the hills, they might be able to fire on the British ships in the harbor below and sink some of them. Excuse me. The general decided that they had to drive the militia off the hills. It would take time to put their plan into action, but 2 months later, on June 17th, 1775, the British launched an attack. Hundreds of redcoats began marching up Breed's Hill. The militiamen at the top of the hill waited nervously. A commander named William Prescott knew his men did not have much ammunition. They would have to make every shot count. The militia waited and waited and waited. Finally, they opened fire. Scores of British troops fell to the ground. Surprisingly, the redcoats were forced to retreat. The British attacked a second time, but again they were beaten back. They attacked a third time, and this time they were successful. The militia had run out of ammunition. Now it was their turn to retreat. Today, this battle is known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. However, that is an unusual name for a battle that was actually fought on Breed's Hill. It is possible that the confusion about the location of the battle caused a lack of familiarity with the area. The two hills are near each other. In fact, a British officer who mapped the battle site mixed them up on his map. It is also possible that Prescott had been ordered to fortify Bunker Hill, but fortified Breed's Hill instead when he realized that it was the more desirable spot. In one sense, the Battle of Bunker Hill was a victory for the British. They achieved their goal. They drove the militia off the hill. In another sense, it felt more like a defeat. Is it really a victory if 1,000 men are killed and wounded compared to 500 on the other side? The British knew they could not afford to continue to lose so many soldiers, even if the eventual outcome was a victory. While the Battle of Bunker Hill was raging outside Boston, 56 representatives from all 13 colonies attended a second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Thomas Jefferson came north to represent Virginia. John Adams, Samuel Adams, and John Hancock made their way south from Massachusetts. Benjamin Franklin, a native Bostonian living in Pennsylvania, did not have far to travel. The making of a government. As months of discussion and debate continued, some decisions were made. Many of these decisions were based on the belief that a peaceful settlement with Great Britain was now impossible. The Second Continental Congress began to function as a government. They made important decisions. They issued paper money. They set up a postal service. They appointed generals and ambassadors. They agreed to the creation of an army and put George Washington in charge of it. This army would eventually be called the Continental Army. Many members of the Second Continental Congress thought that the time had come for the colonies to declare their independence. They wanted the colonies to become a new nation. Others thought there still might be a way to patch things up with the British, and they wanted to try to do so. These members of the Continental Congress were not the only ones who were divided on the question of independence. The people of the colonies they represented were divided as well. A little common sense. One man who may have done more than anyone else to convince people to declare independence was Thomas Paine. Paine was an Englishman who had moved to Philadelphia only a few months earlier at the suggestion of Benjamin Franklin. Franklin thought Paine could help the Patriot movement. Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. It was published in January 1776 while the Second Continental Congress was meeting. Paine believed that monarchy was a foolish way to run a country. Mankind being originally equals in the order of creation, Paine wrote, so how could any one man claim the right to rule over millions? Paine argued that the colonies should separate from Great Britain and form a republic, a government made up of elected representatives. He told his new countrymen they had an amazing opportunity. They could cast off government by kings and replace it with something much, much better. We have every opportunity and every encouragement before us to form the noblest, purest constitution on the face of the earth. We have had it in our power to begin the world over again. The birthday of the new world is at hand. For God's sake, let us come to final separation. Common Sense became a bestseller. Copies were printed in all 13 colonies. Selections were printed in newspapers. Those who could read studied the pamphlet. Those who could not read listened while it was read aloud at an inn or a coffee house. Common Sense convinced many colonists that it was, in fact, time to declare independence. A final separation. By June 1776, most members of the Second Continental Congress were ready to vote for what Paine referred to as a final separation. Thomas Jefferson, a delegate from Virginia, was asked to write an official declaration of independence. His job was to explain why the colonies were breaking away from Great Britain and why it was necessary for them to do so. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams reviewed Jefferson's draft. They made a few changes, but overall they accepted Jefferson's work without reservation. On July 2, 1776, the members of the Second Continental Congress voted for independence. On July 4, 1776, the members voted again, this time on whether to accept Jefferson's Declaration of Independence as the document that outlined the reasons for their desire to be independent. No one voted against it. One colony, New York, abstained. The Declaration of Independence was approved. In the first part of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson wrote specific ideals that he and his fellow colonists wholeheartedly believed to be true. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson believed that the role of government is to protect these rights. However, if a government failed to protect these rights, if it actually took these rights away, then the people had the right to rebel and set up a new government. Jefferson argued that this was what the British government had done. In the second half of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson presented a long list of unacceptable actions the British government had taken. It had levied unfair taxes, taken away the right to trial by jury, and quartered British troops in colonial cities. For all of these reasons and more, Jefferson wrote, the colonists had no other option but to declare independence from Great Britain. Happy birthday to us! Ever since 1776, the 4th of July had been a national holiday in the United States. On this day every year, America celebrates their independence by watching fireworks, singing patriotic songs, and attending picnics and parades. Although it took another month to get all the signatures on the Declaration of Independence, Americans still celebrate Independence Day on July 4th. No simple solution. The colonists did not initially have a national army ready to fight on their behalf. The Continental Army, as such, did not yet exist. In June 1775, the Continental Congress appointed Virginian George Washington to create such an army. Until then, the army had consisted of a loosely organized collection of militia units from New England. The implications of what happened at Lexington and Concord were far from clear in the days following the battles. While there had been plenty of outrage, it had taken over a year for independence to be declared. In fact, after the battles in Lexington and Concord, some patriots had created a flag called the Continental Colors. This flag featured the red and white stripes from the Sons of Liberty flag with an image of the British Union Jack superimposed on it, indicating some degree of continued loyalty to the British government. All right, chaps, that's all there is for today. Don't forget to go to Google Classroom and work on your assignments. Tomorrow is Friday, which means you have a makeup/extra credit day if you didn't get any of your work done this week. I can't wait to continue reading this book, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.